Earlier you said something about PlayStation games or something?
Yeah.
What about it?
It's like those games manipulate the children, you know, the YouTube and just, haven't you ever heard anything like that before?
I mean, yeah.
Like, I really feel like it is manipulating for the children, and they get into the children's homes. And
in the quiet town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, a tragedy unfolded that would haunt the hearts of its community forever. Two young boys, full of dreams and innocence, were taken from this world in an unimaginable act of violence. Their mother, Tiffanie Lucas, became the center of a chilling investigation that exposed the fragility of the human mind and the devastating impact of untreated mental illness. This is the heartbreaking story of love, loss, and the unrelenting quest for justice, a story that asks how something so unthinkable could happen and what we can learn from.
In the early hours of November 8, 2023, the small, close-knit town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, awoke to a tragedy that would forever scar its community. Tiffanie Lucas, a 32-year-old mother, emerged from her modest home on Bentwood Drive, screaming for help. Clutching her chest, she collapsed onto a neighbor's driveway, crying out, "My babies, they're dying." Inside the home, a horrifying scene awaited first responders. Morris Peanut Baker Jr., just 6 years old, and his 9-year-old brother, Jaden Howard, were found unresponsive. Both boys had sustained fatal gunshot wounds to their heads. The haunting silence in the house contrasted sharply with Lucas's cries outside. Police were summoned at 8:37 a.m. by frantic neighbors who reported hearing for gunshots. The children were rushed to North Children's Hospital in Louisville, but despite the heroic efforts of medical staff, they were pronounced dead by 10:15 a.m. Their lives, filled with joy and innocence, had been abruptly stolen. The news sent shockwaves through Shepherdsville, a town unaccustomed to such heinous crimes. Morris was known for his bright smile and love for superheroes, while Jaden had been a diligent student with dreams of becoming an astronaut. Their classmates and teachers were devastated, and grief counselors were dispatched to their school. As detectives began their investigation, suspicion fell on Tiffanie Lucas. Initially, she claimed the shootings were accidental. According to Lucas, she had been handling the firearm when it discharged unexpectedly. But her erratic behavior and conflicting statements cast doubt on her story. Further probing revealed that Lucas had purchased the firearm just days prior to the incident. Neighbors recalled her appearing anxious and withdrawn in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Some described her as a loving mother, while others hinted at struggles that remained hidden behind closed doors. Family members were blindsided. Morris's father, Morris Baker Sr., who lived separately, was inconsolable. "I never thought I'd bury my son," he told reporters, his voice breaking. Jaden's grandmother, Regina Rowan, wept openly, describing Jaden as the light of our family. As the police pieced together the events, Lucas's bizarre claims began to emerge. During her initial interviews, she told investigators she was being controlled by unknown entities through Wi-Fi signals and Facebook. These statements baffled authorities and raised serious concerns about her mental health. Despite her claims, the evidence painted a damning picture. Ballistics confirmed that the boys were shot at close range. The trajectory of the bullets indicated intentional targeting rather than an accidental discharge. The community struggled to reconcile the crime with the image of a devoted mother. By the evening of November 8th, Lucas was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was taken into custody at the Bullock County Detention Center, where she remained held on a $2 million bond. Her mugshot, showing a disheveled woman with vacant eyes, quickly spread across the media. A candlelight vigil was held in honor of Morris and Jaden on November 10th. Hundreds of residents gathered, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of candles. Prayers were offered, songs were sung, and tears were shed as the community mourned the loss of two bright young souls. The tragedy left lingering questions. How could a mother commit such a monstrous act? What had driven her to this point of no return? As the case unfolded, the answers would reveal a haunting tale of mental instability, despair, and shattered lives. In the weeks following the murders, Lucas's behavior became the focal point of the investigation. Her first court appearance on November 20, 2023, was met with a media frenzy. Appearing in an orange jumpsuit, she showed little emotion, her gaze fixed on the floor as charges were read. Her defense team quickly announced plans to pursue an insanity plea. They argued that Lucas was not of sound mind when she committed the killings, citing her erratic behavior and claims of manipulation by external forces. These statements, though bizarre, offered a glimpse into her troubled psyche. Lucas told investigators she believed she was being manipulated through the internet. She described feeling as though unseen forces controlled her thoughts and actions. While these claims lacked credibility, they underscored the possibility of severe mental illness. Forensic psychiatrists evaluated Lucas over the following months. They diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition characterized by delusions and distorted perceptions of reality. However, the prosecution argued that her mental state did not absolve her of responsibility. Prosecutors presented damning evidence, including the timeline of events leading to the murders. Surveillance footage showed Lucas purchasing the firearm on November 2, 2023, at a local sporting goods store. Receipts confirmed she also bought ammunition the same day. Further testimony from neighbors painted a picture of a woman unraveling under pressure. Lucas had reportedly struggled with financial difficulties, a failed relationship, and isolation. Friends described her as withdrawn and prone to outbursts in the months before the tragedy. During a pretrial hearing on April 5, 2024, Detective Richard Beale testified about Lucas's interrogation. He recounted her claims of Wi-Fi manipulation, describing them as disconnected from reality. Despite this, her calculated actions like the firearm purchase suggested premeditation. The defense team argued that Lucas's schizophrenia impaired her ability to distinguish right from wrong. They presented expert witnesses who testified about the impact of untreated mental illness. However, cross-examination by the prosecution highlighted moments of lucidity in Lucas's behavior. On October 23, 2024, Lucas shocked the courtroom by changing her plea to guilty. The open plea left her sentencing to the discretion of the court. Some speculated it was a strategic move to avoid the death penalty, while others believed it signaled acceptance of her guilt. The courtroom fell silent as Lucas's plea was entered. Family members of the victims sat with heavy hearts, processing the weight of her admission. For them, justice felt bittersweet. No sentence could bring back Morris and Jaden. The courtroom was packed with family, friends, and community members. Photographs of Morris and Jaden sat on a table at the front, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the grim proceedings. Candles and flowers surrounded the images, a tribute to lives lost too soon. The sentencing hearing on November 22, 2024, was the culmination of a year-long journey of grief, anger, and unanswered questions. Bullitt Circuit Judge Rodney D. Boras presided over the proceedings, delivering the final verdict on Lucas's fate. Family members delivered emotional impact statements, their voices quivering with raw pain. Regina Rowan, Jaden's grandmother, addressed Lucas directly. "You were their mother. You were supposed to protect them, not take them from us," she said through tears. Morris's father stood before the court, his voice filled with rage and sorrow. "You robbed me of my son's future. I'll never see him graduate, never see him become the man he was meant to be," he said, glaring at Lucas. Lucas remained silent throughout the proceedings. Her expression was blank, offering no apology or explanation. Her detachment only deepened the wounds of those left behind, who yearned for some sign of remorse. Judge Boras spoke at length about the gravity of the crime. He described the murders as heinous and calculated, noting that the evidence left no doubt about Lucas's guilt. "These boys trusted you. You betrayed that trust in the worst possible way," he said. The sentence was swift and severe, to consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge's words echoed in the silent courtroom as he delivered the final blow. Applause erupted from the gallery, a release of pent-up grief and anger. As Lucas was led away in handcuffs, she cast one final glance at the gallery. It was not a look of remorse, but one of emptiness. Her departure marked the end of a dark chapter in Shepherdsville's history. The community continues to mourn Morris and Jaden, their memories kept alive through stories and tributes. Their loss serves as a stark reminder of the importance of mental health awareness and the need to support those in crisis. Though justice was served, the scars left by the tragedy remain. For the families of Morris and Jaden, the pain of their absence will never fade, but their love endures a beacon of light in the shadow of an unthinkable crime.
This one is tough. We're going to Shepherdsville, Kentucky for this deep dive. You know, it's one of those towns where life is a little slower and everyone knows their neighbors and kids are always playing outside.
Sounds peaceful.
Yeah, it was on Bentwood Drive, a street with a bunch of those modest homes with those nice front porches, where something happened that shook the whole town.
Oh, wow. Okay.
2 young brothers, Maurice and Jaden, were shot, and their mother, Tiffanie Lucas, was arrested and then put on trial.
It's such a contrast.
Yeah.
Peaceful community, and then suddenly something horrible happens. Really makes you realize these kinds of things can happen anywhere and how it affects everyone, not just the people directly involved. Yeah.
And you shared a lot of material with me about this case. It's clear this is more than just a crime. You know, this is a human story. There's so much to unpack here.
Yeah, we need to look at everything, I think, like what happened before, the evidence, and then, there's the really tough questions about mental health and the justice system.
Okay, so let's start with that morning, November 8th, 2023. Tiffanie Lucas runs out of her house on Bentwood Drive, screaming for help, holding her chest, and collapses in a neighbor's driveway. Witnesses said she was crying out, "My babies, they're dying."
Oh, it's just, can you imagine being a first responder at that scene? It's a 6-year-old Maurice who loved superheroes, and his brother, 9-year-old Jaden, he wanted to be an astronaut. Both gone.
Shepherdsville is a close community, and this kind of violence just doesn't happen there. I can't imagine the shock, the devastation that must have gone through the town.
Yeah, and suspicion fell on Tiffanie Lucas right away. She first said the shooting was an accident, like the gun went off when she was holding it, But investigators thought her behavior was strange and her story kept changing. There were a lot of red flags.
Like what?
Well, they found out Lucas had bought the gun just a few days before the boys were killed. Then neighbors started talking, some describing her as a loving mother, but others saying she was struggling with things she kept hidden. Yeah, they talked about her being anxious and withdrawn in the weeks before. It's It's tough.
Especially that detail about buying the gun so recently. That's really disturbing.
Yeah.
And then Lucas started talking about being controlled by Wi-Fi signals and Facebook.
Right.
She said these forces were manipulating her and making her do things.
Right. And this, of course, made everyone worry about her mental state even more.
It sounds unbelievable, but it does raise the question about her mental state at the time.
Well, these statements, even though they might sound unbelievable, they actually kind of fit with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, which often includes delusions and hallucinations that make reality distorted.
So we're hearing Lucas claiming this manipulation, but her actions, buying the gun, the close-range shots, it suggests premeditation. How do we square those two things?
Right, and that's where the physical evidence comes in. Ballistics showed the boys were shot close up, and it looked like intentional targeting, not an accident. You had the timeline of events, what the neighbors said, and the security footage of Lucas buying the gun and ammunition. It really paints a clear but tragic picture.
It feels like we're seeing this mix of mental illness and criminal intent, and it ended up causing this awful outcome. It's hard to process it all.
It is. And this intersection is what became super important when the case moved into the legal system. Initially, Lucas pleaded not guilty, and her lawyers planned to argue she wasn't sane because of her mental state.
Okay.
But then, in a twist, she changed her plea to guilty.
What do you think caused that, to change her plea like that? I mean, was it to avoid the death penalty? Or was it like a moment of clarity where she took responsibility?
It's really hard to know what was going on in her mind. But to plead guilty in a case like this, maybe it was that the evidence against her was just too strong, or maybe she wanted to keep her family from having to go through a long trial, maybe even a little bit of remorse, you know?
Maybe.
A year after this tragedy, they held the sentencing hearing. The family gave their statements, the judge talked about how serious the crime was, the loss for the family and the community, and then Lucas was sentenced to 2 life sentences, one after the other, with no parole.
No parole.
Yeah. And what the judge said was really striking. He called the murders heinous and calculated, but he also talked about how mental illness was a factor here. It was complicated.
It makes you think. Even when someone pleads guilty and it seems clear legally, there's always more to it, you know? Unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And the pain and loss that comes with something like this, it's heavy.
Yeah, it is. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to start unpacking those unanswered questions, looking at the warning signs, how this affected the community, and we'll talk more about mental health awareness and intervening early.
It feels like as we look more into this tragedy in Shepherdsville, we need to shift from the legal stuff to the bigger picture. I mean, mental health and what we as a society are responsible for.
You're right. This case, it's not just about crime and punishment. It's about mental illness and what happens when it's not treated. And could this have been prevented? That's something we all have to think about.
It seems like there were signs Tiffanie Lucas was having problems. The material you gave me mentioned money troubles, a relationship ending, and feeling more and more alone in the months before.
Right, and those are all like classic warning signs. And then you have the neighbors who saw changes in her, how she was acting, she was withdrawing, having outbursts. What if someone had seen those signs and gotten her some help? Could things have been different?
It makes you realize how important it is for all of us to know a little something about mental health issues, you know, so we can see the signs when someone is struggling and know how to help them find professional help.
It's about building a culture where people feel okay asking for help without feeling ashamed. But mental illness, it's often hidden, which makes it even harder for people to reach out.
We need to talk about mental illness differently. Instead of asking, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
We should be asking, what can I do to help?
Exactly. It's about empathy, not judgment. Supporting each other, not isolating people.
And going back to Tiffanie Lucas, the material also mentions her delusions, you know, about being controlled by Wi-Fi signals and Facebook. I mean, it's unsettling, but it shows what it's like for someone with paranoid schizophrenia.
And we have to remember, those delusions, she didn't choose them. They were part of her illness. People with those symptoms, they really believe it, even if it doesn't make sense to us.
It's sad to think that Lucas was stuck in that world, you know, unable to tell what was real and what wasn't. And it brings up a hard question. How do we balance mental health and being accountable for your actions?
Yeah, that's where things get really complicated. I mean, we do need to hold people responsible, even when mental illness is involved. But we also have to recognize that someone's mental state can affect their decisions and how much they're to blame.
So it's not just Guilty or not guilty, we have to understand the whole picture of someone's mental health and how that played into what they did.
Exactly. And that's why forensic psychiatrists are so important. They have to figure out what someone's mental state was when the crime happened and if their illness had anything to do with it.
With Lucas, the forensic psychiatrist, they did say she had paranoid schizophrenia. But the prosecution said that didn't mean she wasn't responsible for killing her sons.
Right. And that's the balance that courts have to find, recognizing the impact of mental illness, but still upholding the law. It's tough.
This case, it makes you think about mental health resources too. You know, were there times when Tiffanie Lucas could have gotten the help she needed? Could someone have stepped in and changed things?
That's something we should all be asking ourselves. Are we doing enough? Are the resources there, and can people access them?
It's bigger than just Shepherdsville. This is everywhere.
This tragedy, it shows what can happen when mental illness isn't treated. It's a wake-up call to take mental health seriously, to break down the stigma and make it okay to ask for help.
It's about being there for each other, noticing when someone is different, and knowing where to get them help. Those things matter.
Yeah. We can't just ignore this or pretend it's not happening. This case, it's a lot to take in, but it shows that we need more awareness, more understanding, and more compassion for mental health.
It's hard, even after everything we've talked about. I keep thinking about Maurice and Jaden. Their lives cut short like that. It's a loss that everyone feels. Their family, the community, even people who just hear their story.
It is, and it's important to remember them, to honor them, and to use this to make things better. We've talked about the legal side, the mental health side, but what can we actually do to stop something like this from happening again? What can we learn from this?
Yeah, that's the question, right? What do we do with this knowledge?
Well, early intervention. It seems like Tiffanie Lucas, she was showing all these signs that something was wrong in the weeks before. If someone had noticed those signs, maybe gotten her help, maybe the outcome would be different.
So how do we do that? How do we get better at seeing those signs and doing something about it?
We have to learn about the signs of mental health problems, like changes in mood, behavior, sleep, withdrawing from people, being more anxious or irritable. Those things can be subtle, but they might mean someone is struggling.
Right. But seeing the signs, that's just the first part. Then we have to know what to do.
Exactly. If you're worried about someone, talk to them. Let them know you're there for them, that you want to listen. Encourage them to get professional help. There are lots of resources out there. Therapists, counselors, support groups, even hotlines.
It's not always a crisis, though, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about creating an environment where people feel comfortable talking about their mental health, not feeling like it's something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, we should be able to talk about mental health just like we talk about physical health. It's checking in with each other, listening, being open and vulnerable. That's a good thing, not a bad thing.
This case has been tough to go through, but it shows how important mental health awareness is and that things need to change.
We can't ignore this anymore. What happened in Shepherdsville, it's a wake-up call to put more money into mental health, make it easier to get help, and make it okay to ask for help.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what can our listeners do? What can they do in their own communities to make a difference? Maybe learning about mental health resources, talking to someone who might be struggling, or supporting policies that help people with mental health issues.
Every little thing we do helps. It all adds up. Let's honor Maurice and Jaden's memory by working to make sure tragedies like this don't keep happening.
Thanks for being with us for this deep dive. It's been difficult, but it's important. We hope this starts conversations, encourages action, and gives you some hope. Mental health deserves our attention, and it deserves our help.